All right, I think we'll get started. I know some students from my college are here because I'm being texted and teased that my sweatshirt matches the color of the slides, which I think is probably a good cue for us to get started. Thank you all so much for being here and joining us today. It's truly incredible to see 300 students spending their Friday afternoon from all around the U.S. and Canada, and from a few other even farther afield places that I've seen, joining us to support the Line 3 movement, to support the Frontlines resistance, and to make those really clear connections between our schools' fossil fuel investments and harmful infrastructure projects like Line 3. So just starting with some gratitude to all of you for being here. Um, my name is Emma. I'm an organizer in Minnesota. I go to McAllister College in St. Paul, and I'm almost done, thank goodness. I use they or she pronouns. And St. Paul, where I currently am, is the ancestral lands of the Dakota people and the Anishinaabe people. So thank you again for being here. Today we're going to spend some time talking about the Line 3 pipeline, to spend some time talking about how our schools are invested in that project, right? I know as we were talking about this event that many schools that we talked with were like, well, but we don't know what our schools are invested in, they won't disclose. And so answering some of those questions of how can we say for sure that our schools are funding pipelines, and looking at the financing ecosystem that we know is funding these projects. And then we will be joined, I believe, by Tara Houska. I know she's incredibly busy, but I think that she'll be joining us, the founder of the GNU Collective, who'll be speaking from up north, an Anishinaabe woman who's one of the leaders of the Frontlines resistance to Line 3 on the steering committee for Stop the Money pipeline, and is incredibly knowledgeable and eloquent about the interrelationship between extractive capitalism and the financing of these projects, and how they actually materialize in the real world and the harms that they cause. So that's where we are headed today. And before we get started, I'd like to pause and acknowledge that I think many, maybe most of the people on this call are calling in from somewhere on Turtle Island, and stolen land from Indigenous peoples, as settlers. And perhaps there's some Indigenous folks joining us too, for whom this is their ancestral land. And I think it's common in convention for us to name that now, and to acknowledge that history, right? And by acknowledging the land and the history of how settler colonization brought settlers here and transformed the land, and is continuing to harm the land, as we'll talk about with Line 3, that acknowledgement is important, and that it helps us stay really mindful and really present of where we are in space, and what our responsibilities are to this land, and to our pursuit of decolonization and unsettling, as some say, for settlers. But I'd also invite us all to move beyond acknowledgement today, and think not just about acknowledging the history of land and studying the history of land, but really thinking about what we can do to support decolonial fights for justice, to support land back, to not just talk about land history, but to actually support in really active ways the movements that are led by Indigenous people, that are pushing us beyond the era of settler colonization that we are currently living in. And I think one great way to do that is to support the Line 3 movement. So an invitation to all of us today to acknowledge the land that we're on, and to feel that really deeply, like what that history means, and also to strive for action, and to kind of re-resolve ourselves to a movement that moves beyond just acknowledging. So with that, I would like to introduce our first two speakers. All of the speakers on this panel, except for Tara, are students in Minnesota who helped co-plan this day of action. So, oh, no, that's right. I would like to talk about actions that happened today in Minnesota. Thank you for that. Screen sharing, Captain Hannah. Schools in Minnesota today did actions across the state. I'll keep this brief. You can find them online. There is my college. We had a rally and blockaded a city street through our campus. On to the next slide. Folks in Carlton hung banners outside of their college president's house. I hope that they're listening to their divestment asks. Students in Gustavus marched and had some art, and did some kind of community building, and had conversations about the pipeline. At St. Olaf College in Northfield, I think over 200 students showed up for a die-in and listened to speakers talk about the pipeline, and several students from St. Olaf have spent time on the front lines who were able to share their stories about that. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities had an oil spill on campus, a catastrophe. Many of you maybe know that Enbridge was responsible for the largest ever inland oil spill in the 30th anniversary of that just passed. So this beautiful art installation at the U of M Twin Cities. and a march and a protest and a die-in, I believe, at the University of Minnesota Duluth, a big day there, and they had some frontline speakers come from Camp McGeezy to talk about the resistance happening up north. And an action at University of Minnesota Morris, who was just getting involved with divestment, who also had an oil spill all over their campus mascot and chatted with people and did some consciousness raising around Line 3. And there's the agenda. So I clearly got our slides out of order, but this is where we're heading. And at the end of the rally, we'll take some action together. And now I would like to introduce Stina and Ashu from the University of Minnesota Duluth and from Carleton College, and I will let them introduce themselves a little bit more.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stina Myra. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a student at the University of Minnesota Duluth, which is on traditional Anishinaabe land. I am originally from the small town of Spring Grove in southeastern Minnesota, which lies on traditional Dakota lands. I am here today in solidarity with Indigenous leaders to talk about the realities of Line 3. We could spend hours talking about all of the violent, horrifying truths about this pipeline, but because our time together is short, we'll just talk through some of the most salient facts. I encourage you all to take time to read and listen to stories from the front lines. We will be sharing social media accounts from the movement where you can find action media and stories of the resistance. Please take time to learn more about the movement. Line 3 harms people, the land, and the climate. 3 things that are inextricably linked. Line 3 harms people, particularly the Anishinaabe people whose land the pipeline is being constructed through. It is being constructed through treaty lands that should be protected for Anishinaabe people for posterity, and its construction allows for ongoing settler colonization. Line 3 violates treaty rights and ignores Indigenous sovereignty by threatening their lands, food, cultural resources, and traditional ways of life. Pipeline construction is also directly correlated with increased human trafficking in neighboring communities, particularly impacting Indigenous women, girls, and relatives. Stopping Line 3 is not just about preventing future harms to the climate, but about protecting Indigenous communities right now from the missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives epidemic that is currently destroying families and tearing apart communities. Enbridge knows that the construction of its pipeline is increasing drug and human trafficking. They specifically set aside money in an escrow account to put a Band-Aid on these exact issues that they know will come with the major influx of temporary workers due to the pipeline. 2 pipeline employees, one from Texas and another from Missouri, have recently been arrested as a part of a sex trafficking sting in Itasca County. Enbridge and state regulators are aware of this direct link between Line 3 construction and human trafficking, but they don't care. They do not value human well-being or human life. Following the death of their own construction worker in January, work was paused only for a few hours before starting back up again. The pipeline not only brings sex and drug trafficking, but it also brings police violence. At an in-person action last week, a police officer refused to give a dispersal order to a group of peaceful protesters and said he was going to instead cite us for rioting. When the police liaison tried to talk to him, the sheriff simply responded, "Look, I'm the cop here. I think you know what that means." This misuse of power is harming people and preventing them from exercising their right to peacefully protest. Simply put, Line 3 harms people. Line 3 harms the land and water. To build the pipeline, Enbridge has to construct through miles of fragile wetland ecosystem and clear-cut miles of trees across Minnesota. It crosses more than 230 water bodies in Minnesota alone, the headwaters of the Mississippi River, and a dozen of Monumen or wild rice lakes, which are a sacred food source for the Anishinaabe. Small oil spills are inevitable, and large catastrophic spills are possible. Enbridge has a terrible history of oil spills, including the 2010 Kalamazoo oil spill and the largest ever inland oil spill in the US in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. This past week, March 3rd, marked the 30th anniversary of the spill in Grand Rapids. More than 70 water protectors were gathered peacefully in acknowledgement and were kettled and cited by police on a road outside Grand Rapids. The land that the pipeline is bulldozing its way through is stolen land, and harming the land for extractive industry is ongoing settler colonization that directly harms Anishinaabe people and threatens their lifeways by destroying the land and water. Line 3 threatens the future of our climate. Tar sands oil, the kind of oil that would flow through Line 3, is particularly carbon intensive. It requires cutting trees and scraping the landscape in the boreal forests of Canada, which is one of the largest carbon sequesters in the world. The carbon emissions of that oil that would flow through Line 3 are equivalent to building 50 new coal-fired power plants. Line 3 is a multi-billion-dollar investment project with lots of stakeholders. Constructing Line 3 could lock our energy economy into decades more extraction through the tar sands industry. As Line 3 destroys the land for increased carbon emissions, it contributes to the rising global climate crisis that threatens all of us, and particularly frontlines and marginalized communities around the world. From the Arctic to the Amazon, Indigenous communities are at the forefront of climate change effects, directly experiencing land loss, human rights violations, unemployment, and blatant discrimination. Line 3 is a hazardous project that threatens all of us, and particularly Indigenous communities, lands, and lifeways. We must stand in solidarity with our Indigenous leaders and fight to protect our fellow human beings. Together, we can stop Line 3. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashu. I'm a student at Carleton College, which stands on the traditional lands of the Wapikute Band of the Dakota Nation, and I grew up in Bengaluru, India. The Line 3 pipeline, which you just heard so much about, and as most of you know, is now finally actually being built. After about 7 years of resistance and pressure campaigns, Enbridge received the final permits that they were waiting on in last November, and then construction began in December all across the state. I spent most of December and the early part of January in northern Minnesota, so I got to witness the early stages of the ramp up of construction. And it was absolutely horrifying to see the speed at which Enbridge was moving. They had massive clear-cutting machines, they're called feller bunchers, cutting down wide swathes of trees in no time at all, right next to the Mississippi River. The highways always had massive trucks carrying pipes, wooden matting. It was impossible to take a drive anywhere in the state without seeing them. I visited a storage yard one time, and what I saw there was straight out of a futuristic dystopian novel or something. They had stacks and stacks of pipes, wooden matting piled 1 or 2 stories high sometimes, and long rows of trucks and machines just to move them around. But while the construction was devastating to witness, the Indigenous-led resistance was incredibly inspiring to see as well. There were actions happening almost every week, sometimes oftener, stopping construction, causing delays, and generally getting in the way of the destructive machine that was like the pipeline. Some of the groups who were the key leaders of the resistance are the GNU Collective, the newly formed Camp Migizi, the Welcome Water Protectors Camp in Palisade, and the Red Lake Treaty Camp, the Rise Coalition, and the White Earth Camp. I think one of the best signs that the problems the resistance is creating for Enbridge and their associated subcontractors can be seen in how escalated the police response has been when dealing with actions and protests. Enbridge is so invested in this project that they're willing to go to huge lengths to fund the police in their repression tactics because it's still profitable for them to do that, even though it costs so much. And there was a lot of repression going on. The police were willing to kettle people. They were willing to just arrest people in mass numbers. A lot of the time, there was a one tripod action where they were willing to attempt to cut the person down from the tripod, even though it was incredibly unsafe to do so. But I think, horrifying as that is to see, I think what that really speaks to me is how much this pipeline matters to these corporations, how much they're willing to do to defend them, and therefore how much they're scared of us and the resistance. And like that really shows the true power we have to change these things. And it's this resistance more than anything else that really convinces me of the power that we, the people, have to move away from extractive capitalism and towards a more just way of living together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Stina and Ashu. Next, I would like to pivot to talking a little bit about how our schools and higher education institutions and some broader financial institutions are funding Line 3. I think in planning for this day of action, we talked with lots of schools who named that, one of the big frustrations that we all know about divestment campaigns is that schools generally don't disclose and are really opaque about their investments. And so Imani and Aviva from St. Olaf College and Gustavus Adolphus College, respectively, are going to kind of talk through some of the dimensions of the ways in which we know for sure that our schools are funding these pipelines, and more broadly, the ways that our whole financial system is invested in extractivism and this harmful industry. So I will pass it over to you both.
Thank you so much, Emma. I am so excited to be here with you all today. My name is Aviva Meyerhoff. I am a student at Gustavus Adolphus College. I grew up in Minneapolis, but right now I am joining you all from St. Peter in southern Minnesota, both of whose lands have been cared for generations by the Oceti-Sakowee people. So now that we've learned a little bit more about the actual Line 3 pipeline, Imani and I are going to share about the money pipeline, which is funding its construction, how our schools are all involved in that, and what we as students can do. So something that Emma mentioned, a lot of college divestment organizers constantly struggle with this, and they asked us how to know if your schools are actually involved in the funding of Enbridge and Line 3. How do we know this if our schools don't actually tell us what they're invested in? And so I'm sure as divestment organizers, you've all become familiar with that problem. So we are going to get more into the specifics of that question and also share some resources with you from a group called Little Sis, which is a really incredible power mapping grassroots watchdog organization. And that might help you research more of your school's investments, but we will start by saying this. All of our schools are invested in extractive capitalism and therefore finance the ecosystem that funds pipelines like Line 3. Even if your school doesn't own specific Enbridge stock, although it's completely possible that they do, they certainly have financial relationships with other companies that are financing the Line 3 construction project, and therefore that is feeding into the money pipeline that funds Line 3. Colleges fund Line 3 with endowment investments in Enbridge. An endowment is meant to be a perpetually stable or growing source of income for the institution to support operating expenses indefinitely. You can think of this as like the big savings account, the piggy bank for your school. And so in order to achieve this, colleges invest money from their endowments into many different sectors of the economy. And they aim to diversify this in order to lower their risk of losing money. So it's very likely that many of our college and universities are invested directly into Enbridge equity through third-party firms that trade them on the stock market, and these are called asset managers. So energy infrastructure projects are often considered a key part of a diversified investment strategy. And some of our schools actually might even have private partnerships with Enbridge Energy. Private partnerships help companies finance these big projects and ultimately end up locking funders into contracts that keep them invested for years. And this is definitely not the direction we want to be headed in when we're working together to build a just transition to a sustainable future. Direct investments through the endowment is the best known way that colleges fund Line 3, but there is a broader financial ecosystem that funds these pipelines, including banks, oil companies that will ship through the line, insurance companies, just to name a few. And Imani will help explain that broader ecosystem shortly. Colleges fund Line 3 through investments in Enbridge subsidiary companies and through investments in the oil companies that will use the pipeline. Investments like this through the endowment work much in the same way as direct investments in Enbridge would. There are dozens of companies flowing capital through the money pipeline to Line 3. Colleges fund Line 3 through financial relationships with invested banks, asset managers, and insurers. Colleges don't just participate in the economy through their endowments. They also have banks and insure their assets in ways that are more familiar to those of us who have a checking account or hold car insurance. Colleges also undertake lucrative contracts with big banks to offer campus-sponsored debit cards and ATMs on campus, among other things. Many of the biggest banks and insurers in the world are invested in Enbridge and Line 3. American and Canadian banks like JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, TC Bank, Scotiabank, RBC, and Citibank are big investors in Enbridge. So something to think about as students: do you know who your school banks with? Do you know who operates the ATMs on your campus? Knowing which banks are closest to you will come back up towards the end of this rally when we take action together to defund Line 3. So now we'll hear a little bit more from Imani about the broader financial ecosystem involved in funding Line 3.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name's Imani. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a climate organizer and a senior at St. Olaf College, located on the traditional land of the Wapakute Band of the Dakota Nation. But I grew up in Princeton, Minnesota, on the traditional land of the Mdewakanton people. I'm super excited to be here. There's a whole bunch of people here. I'm excited to share this virtual space with you all and talk more about divestment and defunding Line 3. The actions that took place across the state today make me really excited and re-energized. I'm really proud of what happened at St. Olaf because I know it's just the beginning, and I'm really happy to see so many others saying no to Line 3 and no to investments in fossil fuels. Yeah, so thanks Aviva for helping us understand the more specific ways that our colleges and universities fund Line 3. I'm going to talk about the broader systems, but before I do, I want to name that talking about big picture capitalism can be a lot. It is enormous, it's tangled into every aspect of our daily lives, it's complex and even daunting, but I hope that the conversation we're having today can help us better understand these broader structures of the capitalist death machine so that we can tear that shit down. Anyways, so the finance sector, which we're focusing on today, is tightly interwoven with the extractive industry and settler colonial projects like Line 3. Looking at how deeply our colleges and universities are invested in extractive capitalism helps reveal the nature of this broader political economy. So our extractive economy exploits the people and the land for profit. We know this because we see it firsthand with the Line 3 project. Like Stina mentioned, a worker died during construction. One of their own people died, and work resumed after less than a day. Enbridge brings in hundreds of workers to live in its man camps and build the pipeline, putting Indigenous women at an exponentially higher risk of experiencing violence. To Enbridge, these aren't problems. The extractive economy doesn't value humanity, and it doesn't value the land either. Fossil fuel infrastructure like Line 3 destroys the land for profit. From the now barren Athabasca tar sands fields in Alberta, Canada, to the desecration of sacred wild rice lakes in the pipeline's path in northern Minnesota, it's clear that Enbridge will do anything to secure its profits. Many of us are in Minnesota right now, and it too is stolen native land. Extracting wealth from Indigenous lands is absolutely a foundation of the capitalist economy. Also recognizing that Line 3 isn't an anomaly. It's just a particularly harmful embodiment of this extractive capitalism. And still, it's not just one or two big evil lenders financing this pipeline. It's hundreds of banks and insurance companies, colleges and universities like our own, foundations, pension funds, and any other financial entity you could think of. And still, it's not just the funders. If Line 3 is built, more companies will buy that oil to fuel further harmful projects. We've built an economy on extraction and harm, and all of our schools are implicated in it, which is horrible. But today, we're here to take action against our schools for funding the fossil fuel industry and the Line 3 pipeline. But let's also not forget that our colleges and universities are funding other violent and extractive projects under capitalism. Divesting from fossil fuels is a crucial, essential step. But if our schools are still funding policing, surveillance, deportations, foreign wars, occupations, we'll never truly live in a just and transformed world. We'll just live in a world where they're building solar panels on the roofs of private prisons. But because we want to take action against the financiers of Line 3, like our colleges and our universities, we can't spend more time talking about the radical transformations our economy urgently needs. However, there are groups in the climate finance movement who are having deep, challenging conversations about how we can build a world that values well-being for the land and all people, instead of commodities and extraction. The movement is trying to build projects that can help us actualize this new economy instead of just shifting harm around within existing finance systems. In the document we've been sharing with you throughout the webinar, you'll find an entire section about reinvestment and the just transition. I'm asking you to take it upon yourself today. Spend some time with it. Use it to begin educating yourself on divestment, reinvestment, and Line 3. Empower yourself to dissent. Empower yourself to think outside the box that the state so desperately wants to keep us in, because enough is enough. And if we don't hold our own institutions accountable, they will continue to invest in fossil fuels that support horrible projects like Line 3, that incite violence against the people and the land. Please join us in that learning and those conversations so that we can all undertake organizing projects like these and the ones that happened across the state today to bring about a truly honorable, ethical, and healthy world. Thanks.
Thank you, Aviva and Imani, so much for that. Next up, it is my honor, truly, to introduce a speaker who made time to join us amidst what sounds like a busy day and in the middle of an incredibly busy movement of which she is one of the leaders. Tara Houska is the founder of the GNU Collective, one of the groups leading on the front lines resistance of Line 3, and has been in the movement for climate justice in inspiring and transformative ways for a long time prior to this fight. So I'd like to turn it over to Tara. If I was told that Tara was driving some complicated machinery because she's always really busy. So Tara, if you're there and would like to share a little bit with folks about Line 3 and how these financial systems are harming all of us, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Yeah. Actually, is there someone else that's because I'm going to try to pull over. I am driving a big ass piece of machinery right now, building the world.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out just a little bit.
Take some interesting skill sets. Yeah, if there's someone that wants to go, if someone else would like to speak right now, it'd be a good time.
Yep, absolutely. We will move into a pause for taking action, and then we'll kind of circle back. Hopefully, if you found somewhere to pull over, and Tara can talk a little bit towards that kind of conclusion. So Anna, I think I'll put you on the spot, and our SlideShare team as well, and move us into taking some collective action, because today is a virtual rally, not just a virtual teach-in, because we're gonna give you guys some opportunities to really push back on these financiers and to take some action. So over to you, Anna Reard, who I'd like to introduce. One of the incredible co-organizers for this day of action, is on our core planning team and has been really helping hold down all of the planning pieces. She and I have been working on this project truly for months together. So Anna, thank you, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Emma. So hi, everyone. I'm Anna Reard. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a sophomore at the University of Minnesota. I grew up in Fergus Falls in Otter Tail County, Minnesota, which occupies both stolen Dakota and Anishinaabe homeland. I want to start by saying thank you to all the speakers for all you've shared with us, and especially a big thanks to Tara for making time to join us in the midst of everything unfolding on the front lines. We can see that you're very busy. Now that we've learned a bit more about Line 3, how our schools are funding the pipeline, and how our economic system thrives on extractivism and violence, it's time to take some action to challenge this financiering. The actions we'll take together are just a start, and I want to invite all of you on the call to deepen your resolve to the movement for climate justice to keep pushing for a transformed world. We're going to talk through 2 separate actions and give you some time to get started on them. So first, we had 45 schools sign on to co-sponsor this virtual rally. Thank you all. It's incredible to feel support for the movement to stop Line 3 from all around the United States and Canada. If you're a student on the call and your school signed on to co-sponsor, then you'll have the opportunity to take an action targeting your own school's investments that student organizers on your campus shared with us ahead of today. In a moment, we'll share a document with all of those specific calls to action. Scroll through and find the action that corresponds with your school. Now, if you didn't come to the rally today from a co-sponsoring school, no worries. The Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition is coming up with new ways for all of us to pressure the banks funding Line 3 every week. The action we can all take this week is to jam the calendars of the executives of the banks that fund Line 3. Chase, Bank of America, TD Bank, and Citi are some of the main banks that provide financing for the pipeline. So we are working to inconveniently fill their calendars with hundreds of invitations to remind them to cut ties with Enbridge and defund Line 3. On the action document and in the chat, you'll find a link to the Stop the Money Pipeline website with more detailed instructions on how to jam their calendars and call them out for the harmful projects they fund. So we're going to give you all a few minutes to get started on these actions together before continuing. If you're here from a co-sponsoring school, please prioritize the action from your peer organizers first. And then if you have time, definitely feel free to get started on jamming the calendars of the CEOs of these fossil banks. You can find the action directions document in the chat. If you have any questions about these calls to action or questions or reactions to the content we've heard so far today, let's keep the conversation going in the chat during this brief pause in our program.
We'll take a few more moments for folks to take action. I also just want to say that McGill University and some other schools are throwing updates in the chat of actions. So feel free to like scroll through the chat and keep tracking other conversations and further actions that people are posting about. And definitely keep the calendar jam going. I found it really cathartic to waste bank executives' time, personally. So we'll keep doing actions for a few minutes and then come back together.
All right, before we move on, I want to thank all of you for getting started on these actions. The actions we've taken today are a start, and we'd like to encourage you to keep challenging the extractive economic system that funds projects like Line 3, join your campus group for more organizing like this, sign up for more Stop the Money Pipeline calls to action, and check out the resources document that will be shared to continue to push to stop and defund Line 3.
Thank you for that, Anna. I'm curious, Tara, if you're in a better place to speak or if we should keep moving with some other kind of conversation about Line 3 and some of the links in the document for folks to get involved.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
You can. I thought so. I'm on a hill. All right. Haha. Hello. I don't know. I'm jumping into this late. I'm really sorry. I saw that my name is actually on the little flyer that you guys made. And you've got all these awesome things that you're saying, and you've got prepped stuff you're doing. That's so badass. I can just, I guess, share a few words if that's helpful. About, let's see. So Buju Ginawa, Jabawe Kwan Dishna Kazmakwa Dude, Goching and Dunjaba. My name is Tara. I'm Bear Clan from Kuching First Nation, Anishinaabe, calling in from Anishinaabe territory up here in northern Minnesota. I know some of you. Emma's one of the badasses who's thrown down and like put their own personal freedom and all that on the line for this beautiful place that I'm calling you from. So divestment is not like a super exciting thing. However, it's a very effective thing. It's something that I found to be incredibly effective over the years, to trying to reach these people, because morality is just not something that the banking industry, that the tar sands industry, that the big oil industry, the mining industries are really interested in, right? I mean, they're like the destroyers of the planet, destroyers of life. They're people that have lost their connections with their own selves, you know, and their own humanity. Like they've forgotten that they drink water. They've forgotten that they like can't live without a healthy world. It's just that acquisition of stuff and so-called power, right? It's like, I don't know. To me, I see it as just a existential crisis of human ego and greed, and what that can do to a people and do to a society. But we found very effective strategies in like their money, right? Because they care about that so much. They care about that more than the people sitting across the table from them who are crying and tell them stories about how they're destroying their homelands. They care more about that than the people sitting across from them talking about for-profit prisons. They care more about that than really anything. And so when you hit them in their wallet, then they start really feeling it, right? And these actions where you're going after your colleges, going after your schools, going after the Board of Regents and all these people that operate really entirely off of donors who are usually like alumni. Like I get hit up all the time. I'm an alumni of the University of Minnesota undergrad and law school. I don't have any money to give them, but like, either way, it's people that are giving them their money to operate, and then all the tuition, right, that people are paying. So the tuition and like the federal loans folks are taking out, and the scholarships and all that stuff is what's paying for the university to function, or paying for the college to function. And so you have an enormous amount of agency and power in that, just like we have more agency and power than we think, like being consumers, right? And pushing what's going to happen. Like if we want to move away from fossil fuels and into like green economy, we have a say in that, right? We can push that. And from the indigenous land, as the people that are the rights holders of these places and these spaces, the bank is not going to hear that story from the big oil client that they have. They're going to hear that story from us, right? They're going to hear that we're suing their client in court. They're going to hear that there's like reputational risks, and that there's all these questions about what they're invested in and what they're engaged in. And so with all that said, sorry, there's a school bus going by right now. I'm out in the middle of, there's the school bus. I'm on the side of the road right now. But so there's all that going on when it comes to our own agency and our own autonomy and our own voice. And so bringing these arguments forward to your colleges and your universities, especially places that are, really proud of their social justice programming, they're proud of their social justice focus or their inclusivity, or, they're always bragging about their we are a space that's inclusive of all and all those things. Well, why are you a space that's investing in the destruction of indigenous people's homelands? Why are you a space that's investing in the destruction and theft from my future, from our futures? Like, that's how I feel, is like these companies are just not only perpetuating genocide and colonial theft, but they're also directly stealing from future generations directly. Like, they know what's up, the science has been there for climate crisis for how long? They know exactly what they're doing, and they try to hide behind, well, that's how we've always done things. And changes takes time. And it's all these different things all these different excuses, right? I mean, when we're sitting in a situation where half of Turtle Island's on fire for a big portion of the year now, and there are rising seas pushing a lot of indigenous people actually back in the United States and also all over the global South. I mean, it's not just indigenous people, it's everywhere. Then it's Black and brown folks, right? How many more excuses are we going to make for that, right? And how many more excuses are we going to hear about status quo and the slow transition and all that stuff? And it's just it's ridiculous, frankly. You look at the scientists who are telling us, we got less than a decade for mass extinctions, that are already happening. It's crazy. And the indigenous peoples of the world, 5% of the population, but holding 80% of the world's biodiversity. That's for a reason. It's because we respect the earth as a living being that she is, and she's a relative. And we are not in dominion of anything. If Mother Earth wants to kill us, she will. I mean, I can't believe that human beings don't understand that at this point, that fossil fuel executives think they're gonna somehow buy their way out of, what are you gonna buy your way out of a hurricane? Are you gonna buy your way out of a tornado or some climate disaster? It's not gonna happen, no matter how much money you have. There's those pieces, and then there's also just what kind of world are we going to give to those to come, and what kind of place do we want to hand off, because it never really belongs to us, right? I mean, that's the indigenous wisdom that I think Native people are trying to bring forward, is our mother is not only our relative, it's someone that we live in community with, right? And we're never in possession or dominion of her. We're just here for a little bit of time, and then we move on, and we're supposed to move on with something else that we give. So these actions that you're taking, super powerful. I mean, super important. It's about capitalism, right? But it's about trying to use our agency and our power within capitalism to force that change that's needed. I have seen regents directly like, who invited this lady, when I talk about asking, you know, those students about who their college is invested in when they hear the story of, you know, climate chaos and colonial genocide that's still ongoing in indigenous territories that we've been, you know, they've attempted to kill us, they've attempted to assimilate us, they've attempted to civilize us, they've attempted everything they can, and now they're coming for those last pieces of sending pipelines through our lands, sending mines through our lands, you know, Apache Oak Flat, or you know, here in northern Minnesota, where we're looking at tar sands for Line 3, or the Polymet mine, the Boundary Waters, and you look over at North Dakota, South Dakota, where they're trying to put through Keystone XL for how many years? Like, it just keeps happening. You know, it happens in places out of sight, out of mind. It happens to us. So, yeah, I mean, bring those to your regents, bring those to your student directors, bring that to your college, and use your voice, because you are powerful. It's amazing to see you guys all organizing and doing this stuff. I was not doing that in college, but it was not maybe the situation that it is right now. So situation's gotten pretty dire. Yeah, and lastly, also, I would just add too, like someone pointed on it, but I don't know who Amani was, that who was right before me. I really appreciate that you said that we're not going to solar panel, you know, there's gonna be solar panels on top of the private prisons, because that's exactly what most of the solutions that are presented by big climate kind of like folks are, right? Is that we're going to solar panel and wind turbine our way out of this. That is not a viable option. Like, it's not going to work, one, and two, the answer is not to keep consuming at the incredible destructive rates that we are, right? We have to make some serious changes. So, like, yeah, I mean, using the power that we have within capitalism, but then also what can we do to be in community with the earth in a different way, and maybe be a little uncomfortable like Emma was. So yeah, you were a little uncomfortable, but it was also really cool, right? So there's that.
It was a pretty special day.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for all of that, Taryn. And I was curious, you know, we kind of started the day with some discussion about Line 3. People heard some of the facts and the numbers and water bodies, right? And, you know, talked about the construction that's happening. But I'm curious if you'd be willing to share with us a little bit, you know, what you're seeing from the ground in Line 3, because I think hearing you speak about how this pipeline is being built and what that really looks like and what that feels like to you has been one of the things that's really motivated me. And so if you're willing to share with us a little bit, like what the view from the ground is, I think that, you know, hopefully that can really galvanize folks to think about, you know, what are we all willing to do to stop this pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I'm calling y'all in this, like, here's my view. It's beautiful, right? Like, that's where I am right now. But just past this, so past these trees and past these woods is the places that they're actually, they've already clear cut. You know, the forest has been ripped apart, and they're tearing apart the ground. Now they're actually ripping apart the earth, and that is painful, to be honest. It's deeply hurtful to see that. I mean, to me, it's violence. You know, it's violence on the earth, and it's the rape of Mother Earth that's happening in front of us. You know, we're watching and trying to stop people from tearing apart our mother, and a place that holds the footsteps of our ancestors, right? Like, we've been here since before Minnesota began. These places are deeply important to us, and wild rice is deeply important to us. It's hard to explain how important something like that really is. I mean, it's why Anishinaabe people are here. We came here because this is where the food grows on water. This is where Creator told us to come, and this is the only place in the entire world that wild rice grows. So sending tar sands through that is just like, you know, it's cultural genocide, right? It's a perpetuation and risk that we shouldn't have to take. And just because you've been doing the wrong thing for this long doesn't mean you keep doing it, right? Like, that's another argument. Well, there's already pipelines. Well, yeah, there are, and not in this area. This is completely untouched wetlands, you know, like you said, hundreds of water bodies and all that. But even beyond that, like, is that really an excuse to keep tearing up what's left? You know, and what that feels like to see that and to hear that. We can hear it now in camp. We can hear them working. We can hear their machines. You know, we can see their giant burn piles because they're just burning the woods now at this point. It's like, fires that they're using excavators to maintain, and prevent from getting out of control. Although on the way here, actually, there's like 2 fire trucks heading towards their work site. So maybe one of their fires is out of control. I don't know. And I'm actually calling you from this spot because on the other side, there's a sheriff park that's just been monitoring every single one of us that comes in and out of the space that we created. And our police officers are in direct financial relationship with the Enbridge Corporation. And have drones surveilling us, and like, this harassment that's happening on the ground and whatever, you have to be aware of and thoughtful and cautious of all the time. I mean, I'm like watching a truck actually come up towards me, real pissed off. So I don't know what's going to happen. That's the situation. So the situation is very real, and there are ways to get involved and to use your agency and use your power. And the only reason that I see that we got those bank meetings, that we get like the divestment campaigns, that we get the meetings at the White House and the meetings with CEQ and the meetings that we need to happen with like decision makers, is because of people power. Everything comes from the people. We wouldn't be talking about Line 3 at a national level if it were not for the 130 water protectors that have been arrested, that have put their bodies on the line, that have crawled into pipes, that have crawled on top of pipes, that have blockaded work yards, work sites, that have blocked Public Utility Commission. Like, it takes that to bring attention and to show that we really care. We're willing to do anything to protect this beautiful place. So it's because of the people that we are able, it's part of a healthy movement, is people willing to take risks. I mean, I don't ever think that we're also going to petition our way to climate justice, and we're not going to march in a permitted march to get attention that we desperately need on the theft of the future. It takes being uncomfortable. We have to be willing to do that. And we have to be willing to take that stand and give voice to our mother. So, yeah, I mean, I hope folks understand just how important that really is. It's not just about like getting arrested. It's about, I don't know, you see people out here and like, okay, here's a perfect example. Showtime came out, right? And they did a little piece on Line 3. And then they actually had to ask Gina McCarthy directly about Line 3, which was pretty cool. But when they were here and that TV crew was visiting the Crow Wing River where they're laying out pipe right now, the crew was absolutely shocked that human beings crawled into the pipe the day before to stop construction. Could not believe that. And I was like, yeah, this is what young people and people who recognize what's really happening are willing to do. I'm not at all convinced that, incremental policy change is going to solve the problem in time. They've made money, or they've made water political. They've made climate political. Our mother is not political. There is no politics if we don't have an earth to live on. There is no social justice, gender justice, racial justice if there is not a healthy planet to share and to breathe and to progress on. And I mean, making water and climate and the sacred political is, it's appalling. It's among the more evil things I think that human beings have done to ourselves, is convincing ourselves that we can do something like that and be above that and make it an issue up for debate. Yeah. So get involved to stop Line 3, please. We always need more people, and it's sugar bushing time. Come up and make some maple syrup. Come see the land that we're talking about. It's a beautiful, beautiful place.
Thank you so much, Tara. Is the truck driver leaving you alone? That sounded like almost stressful.
Yeah, it was pretty stressful. He like gave me like the mean mug, like the evil eyes, and like and then kept going. So I think I'm okay. But he's probably trying to figure out what the hell's going on. He might have been a security guy, I'm not sure.
Well, I will reiterate, I think on behalf of everyone, there's been lots of love for you in the chat, which I know is hard to see on a phone, but thank you so much for making time to come and talk with us today amidst truly leading a revolution and still making time to share some wisdom with all of us. It really means a lot. So thank you for that and for all that you do.
Sorry for being late again, for real. Thank you for all your organizing work and your badassery, all of you.
It's all right. We'll let it slide this time, I think, since you were preoccupied.
All right.
And so everyone who joined us, y'all, there are 350 people that have been on this call. I mean, that is powerful, right? People from all across the US and Canada, and I think some folks from further afield that I saw in the chat earlier, joining us to call out, the funding of these pipelines and to really, really learn about the pipeline and get involved with stopping it. I saw Rachel shared in the chat several times, and maybe Rachel, you can drop it again, a link with some more information that you can read more about the pipeline, but also a document that has on-ramps that we've called into the movement, information about how to get oriented and plugged into the infrastructure for people coming up north and doing action or supporting camps, right? Information about how you can support with art and how you can support with, a multitude of the other functions that make the movement happen. So please check out that on-ramps document. Lots of people in the movement put a lot of thought into how to get people involved who want to be involved. And so take some time. And seeing from folks in the chat that the calendar jam is being shut down by bank executives, we'll pass that on to the Stop the Money Pipeline folks. I mean, I think it means that it's working. Stop the Money Pipeline has sent like thousands of emails and annoying phone calls to bank executives and is going to keep campaigning against the bank's funding line 3 for the next few weeks. So make sure to follow Stop the Money Pipeline online and to get their emails for more calls to action. Creative and clever stuff like calendar jams are their wheelhouse, and they will come up with a funny new action to bug bank execs that I'd never thought of like weekly for you all to participate in. So look for that. There's going to be an invitation for people to plan in-person actions starting in the next few weeks from Stomp. So if you live near a Wells Fargo or a Chase Bank, or your school has a Chase Bank on campus, like many do, maybe get involved wherever you are and plan a solidarity action with Line 3, and make sure to send us the pictures so that we can all see how much power we're building around this issue. So I know that we are at the hour, maybe even a minute over we are, but I will thank everyone so much for making the time to join us. Tara for joining us amidst everything, and for all the students who spoke. It was really just wonderful to hear from you all and to learn from you all. So let's call it a day, and thank you everyone who joined us.